William Godwin was a trailblazing philosopher, novelist, and political thinker whose works laid the groundwork for modern anarchism and deeply influenced Romantic and Reformist movements. Here's an exploration of his key life lessons, derived from his principles and writings. 1. The primacy of reason over passion. William Godwin's belief in the supremacy of reason was a cornerstone of his philosophy. At a time when revolutions were reshaping societies and emotions often fueled public discourse, Godwin championed calm, logical deliberation. He argued that human beings are rational creatures capable of rising above their instincts and emotions to act in ways that benefit themselves and others. To him, passion, while natural, could distort judgment and lead to actions that undermine long-term well-being. Godwin's commitment to reason can be seen in his opposition to hasty reforms or impulsive revolutions. While sympathetic to the goals of the French Revolution, he critiqued its violent methods, believing that rational persuasion and education were far more effective tools for lasting change. For Godwin, society would evolve most effectively when individuals used their capacity for reason to question assumptions, debate ideas, and pursue truth. In practical terms, this lesson asks us to prioritize clear thinking in our daily lives. When faced with conflict, Godwin's philosophy invites us to pause, analyze, and understand the motivations and consequences of our actions. For instance, instead of responding with anger to criticism, one might reflect on the validity of the feedback and address it constructively. Similarly, in social or political movements, rational discourse and careful planning ensure that efforts are sustainable and effective. Godwin's emphasis on reason also resonates in the information age. With the proliferation of misinformation and emotionally charged narratives online, his call to think critically is more relevant than ever. To live by this principle means cultivating habits like fact-checking, seeking diverse perspectives, and resisting the pull of impulsive reactions. Ultimately, Godwin's vision of a rational society encourages us to approach life with mindfulness, ensuring that our actions align with our highest principles and collective well-being. 2. The power of education as liberation. For Godwin, education was the engine of human progress and the key to personal and societal liberation. He believed that ignorance was not only a personal limitation but a societal disease that perpetuated inequality, oppression, and stagnation. In his groundbreaking work An Enquiry Concerning Political Justice, he argued that a well-informed populace would naturally gravitate toward justice, truth, and mutual understanding. Godwin's approach to education was revolutionary for his time. He rejected authoritarian models of teaching that prioritized obedience over critical thinking. Instead, he championed an education system that nurtured curiosity, individuality, and moral reasoning. He also advocated for the democratization of knowledge, asserting that access to education should not be restricted by class, wealth, or gender, a radical stance in an era when such access was a privilege of the elite. In practice, Godwin's vision of education emphasizes lifelong learning. It encourages us to seek knowledge not for prestige or material gain but for its intrinsic value and its capacity to transform society. For example, learning about history can help us avoid repeating past mistakes, while understanding science empowers us to tackle challenges like climate change. Education, in Godwin's sense, is not confined to classrooms. It is a continuous process of questioning, exploring, and growing. Today, Godwin's advocacy for education as liberation remains a rallying cry for equitable access to learning. His ideas remind us of the transformative power of knowledge in combating systemic injustices and empowering individuals to create meaningful change. To honor this lesson, we must invest in education, not only for ourselves but for future generations, and ensure that it remains a tool for emancipation rather than a commodity reserved for the privileged few. 3. The pursuit of individual freedom. At the heart of William Godwin's philosophy was his unwavering belief in individual freedom. For Godwin, personal liberty was not merely a political ideal but a moral imperative. He envisioned a world where individuals, unfettered by arbitrary authority, could exercise their own moral and intellectual judgment. In his view, human beings thrive best when they are free to act according to their reason and conscience, unshackled by the constraints of oppressive systems or societal expectations. Godwin's anarchist ideals were revolutionary, especially in a time dominated by monarchies and rigid social hierarchies. He rejected the notion that governments, with their laws and institutions, were inherently just or necessary. Instead, he argued that people, when educated and guided by reason, could govern themselves through mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. This vision was not a call for chaos but for a society where moral individuals act responsibly without coercion. In practice, Godwin's lesson on individual freedom challenges us to examine the forces that influence our decisions and behaviors. Are we truly free, or are we conforming to external pressures, whether from cultural norms, social expectations, or authoritarian structures? Living by this principle means cultivating self-awareness and striving to align our actions with our authentic values and beliefs. Today, this lesson is profoundly relevant in the face of growing concerns about surveillance, censorship, and societal conformity. Godwin's insistence on freedom invites us to advocate for our autonomy and resist forces that seek to limit our individuality. Whether it is defending free speech, challenging unjust laws, or breaking away from toxic expectations, his philosophy reminds us that personal liberty is the foundation of human dignity and progress. 4. Social justice through equity. Godwin was an ardent critic of inherited privilege and systemic inequality. He believed that a just society should be founded on the principles of fairness and equity, where individuals are valued for their merit and contributions rather than their social standing or wealth. His critiques of feudal hierarchies and class-based systems reflected a deep commitment to dismantling structures that perpetuate oppression and inequality. In Political Justice, Godwin argued that social hierarchies are artificial constructs that serve the interests of the few at the expense of the many. He proposed a society where opportunities were not determined by birthright but by an individual's talents, efforts, and moral character. This radical vision inspired later reform movements that sought to address issues of poverty, labor rights, and access to resources. This lesson encourages us to confront the inequities that persist in modern society. From wealth disparities to systemic racism and gender inequality, the barriers to justice are numerous. Godwin's philosophy challenges us to advocate for policies and practices that create a level playing field. For example, supporting educational reforms, fighting for fair wages, and addressing healthcare disparities are all ways to live out this principle. Furthermore, Godwin's emphasis on equity extends to our personal lives. It asks us to examine our own biases and privileges, ensuring that we treat others with fairness and empathy. His vision reminds us that social justice is not an abstract ideal but a daily practice that requires vigilance, compassion, and action. 5. The morality of actions based on consequences. Godwin's ethical philosophy was rooted in a utilitarian framework, where the morality of an action was judged by its consequences. He believed that individuals have a moral duty to consider the broader impact of their choices, striving to maximize happiness and minimize suffering for the greatest number of people. This perspective marked a departure from rigid moral absolutes, focusing instead on practical outcomes and collective well-being. In Political Justice, Godwin explored the implications of this consequentialist approach. He argued that actions must be evaluated not by their intentions or adherence to tradition but by their ability to contribute to the greater good. For example, while loyalty to friends and family is important, Godwin contended that it should not override one's responsibility to society at large. This provocative idea challenged readers to think beyond personal interests and consider their role within the larger human community. Applying this lesson in today's world requires a careful balance of pragmatism and morality. It encourages us to assess the ripple effects of our actions, from the environmental consequences of our consumption habits to the social impact of our professional decisions. Living by this principle means striving to act in ways that uplift others, even when it requires personal sacrifice or challenges our comfort zones. Godwin's focus on consequential ethics is particularly relevant in addressing global challenges like climate change, poverty, and public health. His teachings remind us that individual actions, when guided by an awareness of their outcomes, can collectively create transformative change. By prioritizing the greater good, we honor our interconnectedness and our shared responsibility to one another. 6. The importance of personal responsibility. Personal responsibility was a cornerstone of Godwin's philosophy. He believed that individuals have an ethical obligation to take ownership of their actions, decisions, and their impact on the world. For Godwin, self-accountability was not just a personal virtue but a societal necessity. He argued that when people take responsibility for their choices, they contribute to a more just, harmonious, and self-sufficient society. Godwin's focus on responsibility was closely tied to his belief in the potential for human improvement. He rejected deterministic views that placed blame on external factors such as fate, divine will, or societal structures. Instead, he emphasized the power of human agency, asserting that individuals have the capacity to shape their destinies and influence the course of history. In practice, this lesson calls us to examine how our actions affect others and the world around us. Are we taking responsibility for our mistakes, or are we deflecting blame? Are we contributing positively to our communities, or are we neglecting our duties? Godwin's teachings challenge us to rise above excuses and embrace a proactive approach to life, one that prioritizes integrity, self-awareness, and accountability. This principle is especially relevant in an era where personal and collective responsibility are often in tension. Whether addressing climate change, promoting social justice, or fostering workplace ethics, Godwin's philosophy reminds us that change begins with individual accountability. By owning our role in the challenges we face, we become agents of transformation, capable of inspiring others and driving progress. 7. The vision of a stateless, cooperative society. Godwin's vision of a stateless society was rooted in his belief that coercion and centralized authority are antithetical to human flourishing. He argued that hierarchical institutions, whether monarchies or bureaucracies, perpetuate inequality and inhibit moral development. Instead, he envisioned a cooperative society where individuals interact freely, guided by reason, mutual respect, and shared values. This radical idea was not about dismantling order but about reimagining it. Godwin believed that voluntary associations, formed out of genuine mutual interest, would naturally replace imposed structures of governance. In such a society, individuals would resolve conflicts through dialogue, build systems based on collective needs, and foster solidarity without the need for coercion or violence. In the modern context, Godwin's vision inspires us to rethink the ways we organize our communities and institutions. It challenges us to prioritize collaboration over competition, empathy over domination, and shared purpose over individual gain. From grassroots movements to cooperative businesses, his ideas continue to shape alternative models of governance and social interaction. 8. Equality as a foundation for progress. William Godwin's advocacy for equality was a revolutionary aspect of his philosophy, as he believed that inequality was not a natural state but a result of flawed systems and unjust power structures. He envisioned a society where individuals were not judged by their wealth, social status, or birthright but were valued equally as rational beings capable of contributing to the collective good. For Godwin, equality was not just a moral principle but an essential condition for human progress and flourishing. Godwin's commitment to equality extended to issues of gender, class, and education. He believed that the unequal distribution of resources and opportunities was a significant barrier to societal advancement. His writings criticized systems that perpetuated privilege, arguing instead for a meritocratic society where individuals could realize their potential regardless of their starting point in life. Although his views on gender were progressive for his time, his partner Mary Wollstonecraft pushed these ideas further, advocating for comprehensive equality between men and women. Practicing this lesson today means actively working to dismantle barriers to equality. It calls us to challenge discriminatory practices, support inclusive policies, and advocate for systems that ensure everyone has access to opportunities. For example, addressing wage gaps, promoting diversity in leadership, and ensuring equal access to quality education are modern ways of embodying Godwin's ideals. On a personal level, this lesson also invites us to examine our biases and strive to treat others with fairness and respect. By acknowledging the systemic and interpersonal inequalities around us, we can take meaningful steps to create a more just and equitable world. Godwin's philosophy reminds us that true progress is impossible without a commitment to equality, as it ensures that every individual can contribute to and benefit from the collective good. 9. The ethical obligation to alleviate suffering. Godwin believed that compassion and moral responsibility compelled individuals to act against suffering and injustice. He argued that ignoring the plight of others was not only a failure of empathy but a dereliction of our ethical duty as rational beings. His utilitarian approach emphasized that alleviating suffering was one of the highest purposes of human action, as it directly contributed to the betterment of society. In Political Justice, Godwin explored how systemic oppression and poverty were significant sources of human suffering. He criticized institutions and practices that perpetuated misery, such as exploitative labor, inequitable wealth distribution, and punitive justice systems. Godwin asserted that addressing these issues required not only systemic reforms but also personal responsibility. Each individual, he argued, had a duty to use their resources and abilities to reduce the suffering of others. This lesson challenges us to take an active role in alleviating suffering in our communities and beyond. Whether through direct action, such as volunteering or donating to causes, or through broader efforts like advocating for policy changes, Godwin's teachings remind us of our interconnectedness and shared humanity. For example, addressing issues like homelessness, food insecurity, or access to healthcare are practical applications of this principle. In the modern context, this lesson also encourages us to consider the global dimensions of suffering. Issues such as climate change, refugee crises, and global poverty demand collective action and solidarity. Godwin's philosophy invites us to transcend national and cultural boundaries, recognizing our ethical obligation to all of humanity. By prioritizing compassion and justice, we honor the essence of his vision for a better world. 10. The optimism of human perfectibility. Perhaps one of William Godwin's most radical and inspiring ideas was his belief in the perfectibility of humanity. He maintained that human beings are capable of continuous improvement, both individually and collectively. For Godwin, the flaws and limitations we see in ourselves and society are not fixed but can be overcome through reason, education, and moral effort. This optimism underpinned much of his work, as he envisioned a future where humanity could achieve greater justice, wisdom, and happiness. Godwin rejected deterministic views that portrayed human nature as inherently selfish or violent. Instead, he argued that such traits were products of ignorance, poor education, and corrupt institutions. By reforming these conditions, he believed that individuals could develop virtues like empathy, rationality, and cooperation. His vision was not utopian in the sense of being unattainable, rather, it was a call to action, emphasizing that progress requires deliberate effort and persistence. In practice, this lesson inspires us to adopt a growth mindset, both for ourselves and society. It encourages us to believe in the possibility of positive change, even in the face of adversity. For instance, addressing personal challenges, such as overcoming bad habits or cultivating new skills, reflects Godwin's belief in self-improvement. Similarly, supporting initiatives that promote social progress, such as environmental sustainability or educational reform, aligns with his vision of collective perfectibility. Godwin's optimism also invites us to reframe setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth. By believing in our potential to improve, we are more likely to persevere through challenges and contribute meaningfully to the world. His philosophy serves as a powerful reminder that while perfection may never be achieved, the pursuit of it drives the continuous evolution of individuals and societies alike. Conclusion: Godwin's enduring legacy. William Godwin's life lessons are a profound exploration of reason, justice, freedom, and the human potential for growth. His philosophy challenges us to question the systems and assumptions that shape our lives, urging us to act with integrity, compassion, and a commitment to the greater good. From advocating for individual liberty to envisioning a just and equitable society, his ideas remain deeply relevant in addressing the complexities of the modern world. By embracing Godwin's principles, we are reminded of the transformative power of education, the importance of ethical responsibility, and the enduring hope for human perfectibility. His teachings inspire us not only to reflect on our own actions but also to contribute to the broader project of creating a more rational, compassionate, and just society. In honoring his legacy, we reaffirm our shared capacity for progress and our collective responsibility to build a better future.